Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And we begin as we usually do with the economy. According to new official data published over the weekend, China's aggregate financing, that is total debt, rose by an incredible 7.06 trillion yuan. This is just shy of $1 trillion in the month of January, the largest monthly increase ever recorded in Chinese history. This was driven by a 5.13 trillion RMB increase in bank loans, also well above expectations. Peking University professor of finance Michael Pettis was quick to point out the implications of this, expressing today, quote, "Because I see these debt increases as proxies for economic activity in those parts of the economy that operate under soft budget constraints, if this is continued in February, it should translate into higher but lower quality GDP growth for Q1. By the end of January, China's outstanding aggregate financing was equal to 308% of last year's GDP, versus 303% as of the end of December. Although it's worth noting that January debt increases are always much larger than monthly increases during the rest of the year." End quote. Still, debt surging from 303% of GDP to 308% of GDP is significant and alarming. And these are according to official numbers too. Some analysts have argued that both debt is much higher and GDP considerably smaller, meaning debt to GDP rates could be much more dangerously high. Now, let's move from the macro level to the individual level. In a piece published today, Chinese financial media outlet Caixin discussed the issue of China's growing personal debt crisis. Many small business owners and individuals in China have borrowed heavily in recent years, only to find themselves struggling as economic conditions deteriorate, the piece argues. China's personal debt crisis is increasingly evident in banks' financial reports. By mid-2024, China Construction Bank's non-performing loan (NPL) rate for personal loans had risen to 0.84%, up from 0.66% as of the end of 2023. The most significant increases were in personal business loans, which surged from 0.95% to 1.57%, and credit card loans, which rose from 1.66% to 1.86%. Other state-owned banks reported similar trends. Joint stock banks have been hit even harder. Bohai Bank's non-performing loan ratio for personal loans reached 3.30% by mid-2024, marking a 1.05 percentage point rise from the previous year. Financial institutions are seeing growing repayment difficulties, especially among small business owners affected by delayed payments from upstream companies. As regular viewers will know, many of these upstream companies are either directly owned or part of the local government. And because of their fiscal constraints, one of the things these local governments have begun doing is discontinuing payments to downstream companies. Desperate borrowers have increasingly turned to debt intermediaries that promote debt relief through debt optimization and debt restructuring. These services claim to negotiate lower interest rates, extend repayment terms, or secure settlements at significant discounts. However, many operate in legal grey areas, engaging in fraudulent schemes that exploit distressed debtors. Since 2023, Caixin writes, regulators have issued repeated warnings about illegal debt restructuring services. A high-profile case in Ningxia exposed a fraudulent network that promised debt resolution at a fraction of the original amount, defrauding 5,000 debtors of over 200 million yuan. Some intermediaries have even fabricated medical records to exploit bank policies offering relief to those with severe illnesses. While Chinese banks generally avoid publicizing debt relief policies, they have begun offering loan extensions and interest rate reductions on a case-by-case basis. Banks prefer silent negotiations to prevent moral hazard, fearing that publicizing such policies might encourage widespread defaults. Social media has become a battleground where intermediaries exploit this lack of transparency, offering misleading guidance on how to negotiate debt reductions. In developed economies like the US and Europe, personal debt restructuring is a well-established practice. Banks commonly negotiate lower principal amounts when repayment becomes unfeasible, recognizing that recovering part of a loan is often better than losing the full amount. In contrast, Chinese banks generally sell non-performing loans in bulk to asset management firms at steep discounts rather than negotiating with individual borrowers. In the fourth quarter of 2024 alone, China transferred 71.54 billion yuan in personal non-performing loans, with consumer loans accounting for the majority. The growing demand for debt restructuring has exposed gaps in China's financial regulatory framework. Unlike the United States, where credit consulting agencies and debt settlement firms operate under strict regulations, China lacks clear guidelines for personal debt management. This, the article argues, has led to an explosion of fraudulent debt firms preying on vulnerable borrowers. Banking professionals suggest that China should implement policies similar to those in Western economies, incorporating regulated debt management agencies into the financial system. A structured approach would provide struggling debtors with legitimate relief options while preventing exploitation by unscrupulous intermediaries. As economic conditions remain uncertain, the issue of personal debt will continue to challenge China's financial institutions. Without a formalized bankruptcy law or transparent restructuring policies, individuals and small business owners will remain at the mercy of an opaque and sometimes predatory debt resolution system. Next up, we have two more developments to cover, but just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, I have a big favor to ask. That is just 2 clicks of the mouse, like and subscribe. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description. For those who want to go the extra mile and help me keep China Update financially sustainable, the channel relies primarily on subscriber support to keep going. I limit sponsored features so that the majority of the funding comes directly from the audience rather than corporations. So this is also a big help. Thank you so much, everybody, for the ongoing support. Next up, Beijing is ramping up its efforts to retain control over critical technologies as trade tensions with the United States, Europe, and others intensify. Recent government measures have made it increasingly difficult for Chinese engineers and equipment to leave the country, while also introducing export controls on key technological processes. We have covered these developments as they have occurred over the last month or so, but it is worth summing some of this up here. Over the past few months, Chinese authorities have restricted the movement of essential personnel and technology, particularly in industries such as battery production and critical mineral processing. These efforts are seen as a countermeasure to US tariffs and ongoing trade disputes with Europe, particularly in the automotive sector. The fear that companies might relocate production outside China has spurred Beijing's efforts to retain its technological advantages, those few that it does have. One of the most affected companies is Foxconn, Apple's primary manufacturing partner. Sources indicate that Chinese officials have complicated Foxconn's attempts to transfer machinery and technical managers to India, where Apple seeks to diversify its supply chains. Similar challenges have also been reported by other Taiwanese electronics companies attempting to send equipment to Indian facilities, while operators in Southeast Asia remain largely unaffected. Reports suggest that Chinese customs authorities are slowing the export of key components to India, allegedly to deter electronics manufacturers from shifting production there. An Indian official claimed that these delays were intentional efforts to hinder India's growing role in global supply chains. China's restrictive policies mirror the very export controls it has criticized in the West. Formal restrictions have been introduced on technologies related to lithium extraction and the production of advanced battery materials. These measures could limit Chinese battery manufacturers from fully relocating operations to Europe and other regions, ensuring that critical components like lithium iron phosphate (LFP) cathodes remain dependent on Chinese supply chains. The company's dominance in lithium technology has enabled Chinese companies to surpass South Korea and Japanese competitors in battery production. However, new export controls threaten South Korea's reliance on Chinese LFP materials, with some companies voicing concerns to Beijing over the potential disruption of partnerships. China is also expanding its restrictions on strategic materials, including rare earth elements essential for electric vehicles and electronics. By limiting the export of both raw materials and the technology needed to refine them, Beijing is tightening its grip on global supply chains and reinforcing its industrial dominance. Of course, while these moves may achieve their intended purpose in the short term, Long term, it's difficult to know whether this is the right move for Beijing. This could simply reinforce the thinking of many countries and accelerate the decoupling of supply chains that has already been underway for some time. We are likely to see a reaction in the major Western capitals of the world that will mean that some of these supply chains are reshored and brought closer to home. Ultimately, these policies reflect China's growing focus on securing its technological edge amid shifting trade dynamics, ensuring that global supply chains remain dependent on Chinese expertise and production. Like I said, this move may end up backfiring and achieving precisely the opposite result. Okay, now let's end today's episode on a light note. The highly anticipated sequel to the 2019 animated blockbuster Ne Zha has taken the Chinese box office by storm. Released on the 29th of January, the first day of the Lunar New Year, Ne Zha 2 shattered records, grossing over 6.8 billion yuan, $940 million in less than 10 days. It surpassed Hollywood giants like Avengers Endgame and Star Wars The Force Awakens to claim the biggest single market box office total in China in history. Dominating the Spring Festival box office with over 50% of earnings, Ne Zha 2 reinvigorated China's film industry after a sluggish 2024. Theaters scrambled to add more screenings, capitalizing on renewed audience enthusiasm. Beyond numbers, domestic critics say the film reaffirmed the power of compelling storytelling and high-quality animation in drawing crowds. Building on the first film's success, Ne Zha 2 reimagines the legendary figure from the 16th century novel Investiture of the Gods, or Fengshan Yan Yi. Ne Zha, a demon child fated to die in 3 years, the story goes, now challenges the very laws governing gods and demons. The film's rebellious themes, stunning visual effects, and high-energy action sequences, say reviewers, captivated audiences, earning an 8.5 rating on Douban. Director Yang Yu, known for pushing the boundaries of Chinese animation, spent 5 years making Ne Zha 2, with over 1,900 visual effects shots and an epic battle featuring 200 million individually animated characters. The film sets a new benchmark for domestic animation, as Ne Zha 2 gears up for its North American release. It carries the weight of seeing whether Chinese animation films can now finally succeed on a global stage. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much everybody for watching. Have a good Monday, have a productive week, and I will see you all tomorrow.